This lecture, we will start to look at drawing, the first of the studio disciplines that will be discussed in this part of the course. And drawing basically is the starting point for many other works that are done. So it's kind of interesting because drawing can be preliminary. It can be where ideas start for another completely finished piece, like a painting, or like I talked about the Richard Serra, his massive sculptures start off as simple line drawings. And at the same time, drawings can be a finished piece in itself. So drawing basically is having some type of media, running across a support or a surface, typically monochromatic. Charcoal and graphite pencil are the most common media that are used. There are color medias as well. And basically it's linear. It's all made of lines. Of course, then you can manipulate, smudge, do all sorts of stuff to the lines to get different effects, details, and things like that. And drawing can be fun. So a little bit, kind of about drawing. You have some type of pigment, and that pigment is held together with some type of binder. So when you get into the dry media, the pencils, graphite, compressed charcoal, chalks, and crayons, they all have like a different type of binding substance for them. You basically have this powder, you got to glue and hold it together somehow. Metal point is but the only one that does not use a type of pigment in a way. Liquid media is, that's pigment with water, basic chemistry for it. And so different types of drawings, calligraphy, beautiful writing, the calligraphical line, very loose, like the gestures, very loose type of line, a lot of sketching, real quick, real fast type of drawing. And conceptual and installation art, that's really getting away from your stereotypical ideas on what drawing is. And then, digital, using a computer, to using, Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop and other type of drawing programs to, create a drawing. And when you get to like this pure basic definition of drawing, there's no difference from using traditional media like pen and ink, or pencil and computer. And you're just splitting hairs when it comes down to the differences. So the first images that we have, they're technically they are types of drawing. So the lion panel in the Chauvet cave in France, arguably one of the most famous of the cave drawings, often sometimes referred to as cave paintings. Real gray area that separates those, but nonetheless, some of the first images we have are drawing. More recently, there have been other older images found, but they're more sort of geometric. They're not quite as detailed as these are. So at some point, someone figured out they could start making marks with a burnt piece of wood, charcoal, and they're able to record or tell stories, whatever these images are used for. But the first type of art we have are basically it's these drawings. So the Edward Degas, Dancer Adjusting Her Slipper, for it, as I talked about, this would be one of the studies for another piece of his. If you look at her right hand, you kind of look closely, you can see where it's like he's changing the positions of it, as well as her left foot. You can kind of see where he's changed and different positions of the foot that she's standing on. So, and other little areas where there's these little evidence of lines, and he's changing. Finally, kind of gets what he likes and starts to sort of give a lot more sort of detail and definition to it. So that would be in a way that you could tell this is a sketch, something more preliminary, as well as sort of the grid-like lines on top of it. So that's basically whenever you're copying from a small drawing to a larger canvas, breaking the image up in this grid-like fashion, much easier way to transfer from one to the other, since they didn't have projectors or copiers or things like that back then. And the Albert Dürer lobster, it's a more finished typed drawing. You can really see a lot of details and a lot of precision and emphasis that he's put into his image. Much more better rendered type image, rendered where there's more definition, there's the shading and modeling that's going on, so that it's this believable 3D image that he's trying to create, even though it's just a flat surface. And of course, this could be one of the things that unusual creatures that he came across on his travels from Germany down into Italy. So look at these strange weird creatures they're eating down there. So, but they are delicious. So looking at some of the different types of media, it's a Jim Dine, Jessie with Scarf, done with graphite. As you kind of look at this, what I love about Jim Dine and his drawing is the way that he fills in the background. And as I talked about the Rubin vase, where it's either two faces staring at each other, or it's a vase. It kind of goes back and forth, but it's being defined by the background. Is that the black face on a white background, or two white faces with the black background? Well, what's going on? So we kind of get the same thing with Dine here, where part of this figure is defined by the background. You can really see where there's a lot of material, a lot of the graphite he's really laying down and really laboring over this drawing, so that it's a lot more complex. It's not really this sort of simple type of thing that he's doing. Even though they talk about how drawing is so basic and simple, it's not always basic and simple. So, and then charcoal. So charcoal is basically controlled burnt wood. It's pretty easy to make your own charcoal if you have some real dry branches. Kind of scrape off all the bark, wrap it in a bunch of aluminum foil. Basically, you want all the heat and the pressure. You just don't want an actual flame to get to the wood. They wrap it real good with aluminum foil, and if you got a fire pit or something, you can put it in there, and you can make your own charcoal. And so Katie Kollwitz, using charcoal here, the thing I love about Katie Kollwitz is it's kind of the exact opposite of Jim Dine. She does not in a way, does not really labor over her drawings, but at the same time, it's kind of the less is more with her, and the less that she does give, it's like, every mark has its specific place. Um, every mark, is there where it needs to be. Uh, so it's very, very beautiful drawings that she does. Um, but like I said, kind of the little that she gives in the drawings, it just makes them that more wonderful looking. But again, the charcoal is basically the controlled uh, burnt wood. Typically, you want a softer wood for uh, if you're to make your own charcoal. And charcoal comes in all different shapes and sizes. The other type of charcoal, compressed charcoal, is basically grinding up the charcoal into a real fine powder and using some type of binding agent, usually like gum arabic or something like that. It also gives a little bit of glue to it so that when you're drawing with it, it sticks to the paper. And then metal point. Metal point is typically done with silver. When it comes down to it, silver is actually a pretty gross metal because it tarnishes. And so with silver point, you're basically wiping that, you're basically drawing with that tarnish. And so before we had the graphite pencil come along in the Renaissance, silver point was done the majority of the time. So the one major drawback with silver point, actually there's a few major drawbacks. The first, you have to have a prepared surface. Basically, you build up the surface that you're going to be drawing on, so it's almost like a real light grit sandpaper. Um, and then that basically you're polishing the little metal or silver point tip, so you're getting all the stuff off of it, the tarnish. It's but the big drawback is you cannot erase any of your lines. Once they're down, they're down. They had almost like whiteout type stuff you could put on there to correct your drawings, but not the easiest material to work with. Then crayon, pastel, and chalk. So depending on which one, it's kind of, they're all colors. You're using colored pigments. So crayon is traditionally the pigment with some type of wax. So the crayons that we all have grown up with, Crayola crayons, that's them. That's the pigment with wax. Pastels come dry pastels and oil pastels. It's dry pastel and chalk. Their chemistries are a little bit similar, where they're using gum arabic, like the compressed charcoal I talked about. The gum arabic's there to help it, stick to the surface. There's also oil pastels where using boiled linseed oil as part of the binding agent. The oil pastels, you can even rework your image with some of the same solvents and other materials, other different medias that you can use with oil paints. So like I said, there's kind of a big gray area over those. And then the wet media, quill and pen. So basically, pen and ink. Quill, like seen the period movies where they got the big turkey feather to write with. You can get, artist pens or, the metal kind of fountain pens. They come in all different shapes and sizes. Real fine type of line or real thick, heavy line. And they're uh, about like 15 or 20 different sizes that you can get in with those. But basically, you're dipping it in the ink, and the ink is essentially you take soot and mix it with water. Um, some say put a little gum arabic in there again, so there's kind of a glue to it. There's some other homemade recipes where you put a little bit of vinegar, and it kind of does the same thing. It helps it to kind of uh, stick to the drawing surface or the paper. Um, And then here we have an example of brush and ink. So much like brushes that you would paint with, you're just dipping it in the ink, using it. Uh, and kind of moving on, back to this idea of drawing what it should be, where it should be. Typically drawing is done on some type of paper, but it doesn't necessarily always have to be done on paper. It can be done on, any surface that you want, a wide range of material that you want to use. So this idea of not being limited, much like the Chauvet cave, you have this massive, massive area to fill with the drawing. So why can't we do that today? Uh, so some examples, Kara Walker, her Slavery, Slavery. And Kara Walker, little quick bit about her. She is a African American artist, and a lot of her images deal with uh, treatment and sort of imagery that would come from African American communities during the 19th century. Um, I like to sort of describe her as this little thorn in the side that the whole idea of the treatment and the ownership of people and all that, that's pretty bad idea. Um, so this particular piece, most of her work, she actually draws on like gigantic sheets of construction paper, cuts them out. Um, and then uses some type of glue to get them up there on the wall. And so brief, the brief description of installation art, this is where it gets into the installation art realm. So that what happens is, you can see this is this round room. If you're to have the ability to show the whole image, it's almost like there's no starting point and there's no end point. So, typically we'll go and we'll look at something and we almost like read it like a sentence. We start on the left side of the canvas, work our way to the right. In this case, it's like, where do I really start with this? And you go, okay, I'll just start with the moon. That's kind of a nice thing we start with, and you start kind of moving around, and you realize that you're being sort of engulfed and you become a part of this drawing. You're not merely just a viewer, but you start to become a part of it because you're totally surrounded by the drawing. And then silhouette, getting into conceptual art where the idea is the most important part. Silhouette did a series of wall drawings that technically he never drew. So when Yale did a big retrospect of his wall drawings back in '94, they basically got all of the instructions that Sol LeWitt laid out to create drawings. So again, he's never made this drawing. This drawing never existed. The only thing that existed were the instructions on how to create a drawing. So I've always tried to talk someone that's taking a drawing class, don't actually draw anything, just instead of drawing something, write down all the instructions for it, but don't tell your drawing teacher I told you to do that. Or maybe you should, I don't know, could be fun. Uh, and then finally, Gary Simmons' Boom from 1996. So this is always kind of a fun discussion piece. Looking at it, at his drawing, first appearance, start thinking about the materials that he used. What was his medium of choice? So in this case, it is chalk. So some of you may know you can go buy chalkboard paint and coat an entire wall with it, or it could be on panels, different ways. Knowing Gary Simmons probably painted onto the wall. So you basically have a gigantic chalkboard to work on. And so chalk, in a way, is sort of problematic because unless you treat it with fixative spray, it's basically you're putting a clear coat on top of it to help protect it. But Gary Simmons wouldn't do that with his drawings. He simply would make the drawings. Typically, he liked to do these drawings so that there was an AC vent nearby. So basically, air is constantly flowing on these images. And so this particular image, if you look at it, it's this explosion, but it's more of this cartoony type explosion, something that, some type of explosion you would see in a cartoon. The Saturday morning cartoons and stuff like that. And so the reason for using chalk, and like I said, having a specific location where there's sort of constantly air flowing over it, over a period of time, this image is going to start to fade away. It's going to kind of self-erase in a way. And his whole idea for doing that is he did this series of drawings based from his memories from his childhood and growing up. So usually in discussing this in a classroom setting, I always like to, that's kind of out there, but I start bringing up the movie Inside Out and Boing Boing and what happens to Boing Boing. At some point, Riley decides she has to grow up, and Boing Boing, this imaginary character, kind of resurfaces, but he knows his time has come. He has to fade away. He has to, erase. He has to be erased. And so that's why, Gary Simmons purposely choosing this material that over a period of time, you're left with just traces of this drawing, and then, the big pile of chalk dust on the ground below it. So that is it for drawing. The next lecture, we'll start looking at painting.